So, good afternoon, everyone, and I wish to thank you first and appreciate you for finding time to join us in this session. To begin with, it is rather we are running it as a webinar series. This should be our third, and it is in line with our conference, that is the EAK conference 2024, which majors on climate change and the energy transition process. Today, we are very delighted to have a team from the Kenya Nuclear Regulatory Authority. And as a major player in the energy sector, they will be breaking it down for us and helping us understand what it is that they do, what it is what it is that we can benefit in the space of climate change and the process of this energy transition. Our speakers joining us from that side will be Mr. Edward Mayaka, a facilitator, and is the Director Partnership and Public Awareness. We also have Mr. Isaac Waweru, is the Director, Nuclear Security. And Mr. Mayaka, you could help me here. We have Mundia, and he heads
Nuclear Security Directorate.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Thank you. So, without much further ado, I want to welcome Mr. Mayaka to lead this talk series for us. Thank you. And the floor is yours, Mayaka.
Okay, thank you very much, Chairman and members of the EIK. It's an honor for us and a privilege to come and share with you in this webinar. So with me, I'm a colleague. I will give him an opportunity to introduce himself. Isaac. Isaac, you can go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon to you all. It's my pleasure to be invited to this webinar. I'm Isaac Mundia from the Kenya Nuclear Regulatory Authority, attached in the Directorate of Nuclear Security and Resource Center. And I'm glad to be part of today's webinar where we'll be able to share our experiences and also to respond to your questions and inquiries. And thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Isaac. So I'm going to start sharing. Share. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. It's very clear. You may go ahead.
Yeah, so this afternoon, we're just going to have discussions among ourselves on environmental and social safeguards in nuclear technology, in nuclear energy. So we are going to look at principles and some of the practices which are here locally and internationally. So this is what we're going to cover. We're going to look at the introduction. Then we are going to look at the fundamental principles of nuclear law, because nuclear law is somewhat different from the other areas. Then we're going to look at the environmental safeguards, social safeguards, the international framework. Then we're going to look at the environmental monitoring and protection, then social impact assessment and management, which I know is your bread and butter. We are going to look at the safety culture and human factors, emergency preparedness and response, waste management and decommissioning. We are going to look at the regulatory framework and compliance. You realize that my colleague and I come from the Kenya Nuclear Regulatory Authority. Then we're going to look at conclusions. Then we are going to have some discussions, and not just questions to ourselves, but discussions among ourselves. So when we're looking at the nuclear industry, there's so many other industries we can learn from. Though the nuclear industry is not so developed in Kenya, but there are so many things we can learn from regulation from other industries. For example, we have pharmaceutical industry, then we have the airline industry. That if there's a Boeing aeroplane, it's able to land comfortably in Kenya, in JKIA, and even go to any other country and land without having any challenges. So that the airports, the way they are constructed, they're constructed to be able to enable any airline from Boeing or the Airbus or any other airline to be able to land comfortably. So normally we talk about sustainable development, and in the SDGs under 7, there's the issue of affordable and clean energy. And nuclear energy is a low carbon energy source with the potential to meet growing energy demands. And in Kenya, in the year 2010, the National Economic and Social Council had a meeting, and they came up with a proposal that Kenya should consider nuclear energy as a possible energy need option. So if you look at the Vision 2030, the nuclear, where we have the pillars, there's the economic, there's the social, and there's the political pillar. So one of the key enablers in this Vision of 2030 is that a vibrant power sector that meets electricity required to drive flagship projects and programs. The Vision 2030 is a very ambitious program where we're looking at Kenya being a middle-income country by the year 2030, which is quite fast approaching. And it's a key, nuclear energy is a key enabler. Please give me a minute.
That is okay. We'll give you a minute. In the meantime, thank you for all who are joining, and also as more keep joining. We are all welcome to giving your feedback, any questions that you may have as the speakers make their presentation, but we'll take them once they finish their presentation. At the end, you are welcome to put in your comments and engage with us on the chat section. Thank you. Welcome back, Mr. Mayaka.
Yeah, thank you very much, and apologies. So,
sorry, sir. Maybe you could put your presentation. Yes, perfect. That's perfect now.
Yeah, so I was saying that energy is really a key enabler. In fact, I was reading somewhere where they were saying it's like we breathe energy. More or less everything we do is about energy. And earlier on in our physics classes, we were learning that energy cannot be created nor destroyed, but it can be converted from one form to another. But now, what we're looking at, normally when we go for meetings or when we have discussions and we mention the issue of nuclear, the direct question which comes to us is safety. How safe is it? And we have a principle, and it's an international principle, that who is primarily responsible for ensuring safety. So the use of nuclear energy and radiation typically involves numerous parties, with so many parties engaged in nuclear-related activity. However, the entity that has been consistently identified as primarily responsible is the operator or licensee. So if we're going to have a company, let's say X, coming to Kenya and being licensed to produce nuclear, to produce power through nuclear, then that that entity has the primary responsibility of ensuring that there is safety. I know there are so many other actors, and as you can see from there, we have the state, the country Kenya, and everything. People say government when there are floods. Government, everything is government, because government is the big entity. Then we have the regulator there. You can see. So the regulator is an agency which is formed by government to ensure that there is safety and security in the nuclear. Then we have the industry, we have the operators, we have so many people in the industry. We have like the people who can offer the services, the people who need the power, the companies manufacturing, and so on. Then we have the public stakeholders, and in our constitution in 2010, and we've been seeing of late so many things going to court, because the public in the constitution 2010, it is a requirement that public awareness and the public consultation must be done. And even if you bring a very good project, perfect, which fits everything, but if there's no public participation, then you can see, as we have just seen in the recent past, the courts are bound to throw it out. And you have been seeing of late, Kenyans are very litigious, where almost everything now is going to court. And if you are not careful, then it is not able to know. So what are the requirements? So like the industry, what does it require from the state? Then the public or stakeholders, they demand information. They demand transparency. You cannot hide. You are not able to hide and have something somewhere and you have hidden it. And the good thing is that for you members of EIK, this is again your bread and butter. The issue of public participation, stakeholders, and so on. These are an area where you are very strong in. So the basic principle where everybody asks, you want to have nuclear power in Kenya? The first question is, how are we safe? Are we safe? So there are some international principles which have been developed and they are internationally accepted for nuclear power. So the first and the utmost principle is the safety principle. That to be able to have the nuclear energy, the key thing is that you must demonstrate that it is safe for use. And you can see there, we have the International Atomic Energy Agency, and there are quite a number of documentations which have been developed. So the first document is the government legal and the regulatory framework for safety, which is more or less like, I can say, yeah, it's more or less like the Bible or the Quran for having or utilizing nuclear power energy or technology in our country. Then there is now a very specific safety document that is what we call the SSG 16, which says that establishing the safety infrastructure for a nuclear power program. And as we go, we're going to see the different elements of that. Then there's the security principle. When we are about nuclear, there's concerns of security. We should see in the news some countries where there is no very good peaceful, like in the Middle East, where there is always problems. So there is always a mention of nuclear, and is it safe or not? So security is a fundamental principle for utilization of nuclear energy. Then there's the sustainable development principle, where we are saying that anything we are using now, is it fitting now, and are we in a position of messing the future generation? Because you can have a technology which as per now it's okay, but we are putting unnecessary risk and hazards to the future generation. Then I said earlier about the transparency principle, and this one is again there because again the the earlier nuclear power development programs started in the military programs originating from the Second World War. And during that time, there was a lot of secrecy. The government or the agencies, they were not providing information to the public. That's why now, when the international agencies came, there is consensus in the world that there need to be transparency in this. And I think this is just not for nuclear, for so many other projects, there need to be transparency. Then there is the compliance and the international cooperation principle that although nuclear power, for example, like when there was the Chernobyl, some time ago in 1986, there was what we call the Chernobyl nuclear accident. And so the accident happened. The country then, Ukraine, didn't want to say the truth. So they hid the information. But countries north of the Ukraine, like Finland and other countries, started detecting elevated levels of radiation. And so there are quite now a number of international instruments, international agreements that nuclear energy, though it is developed within a territory, it can result in damage beyond its borders. And in fact, sometimes when people ask me that, okay, where do you work? I say I work for the Kenya Nuclear Regulatory Authority. Then the next question is, do we have nuclear in Kenya, nuclear power? I say no. Then they say, then why are we paying you? Yeah, not realizing that even if we don't have nuclear power in Kenya, the effects, there could be effects which can arise due to transboundary issues and so on. Now, as I said earlier, Kenya in 2010, there were some discussions on having nuclear power to be part of our energy mix, and a number of programs have been implemented. There's the what we call the International Atomic Energy Agency milestone, where there are 3 phases. The first phase is the consideration before a decision to launch a nuclear power program is taken. This is the pre-project, and here a number of programs are undertaken. Then there's the phase 2, then there's the phase 3. So in phase 1, we have more or less of the pre-feasibility studies and so on. In phase 2 is the preparation work for the construction of a nuclear power plant after a policy decision has been taken. And it can be quite subject to discussions, but my feeling is that we could be somewhere in phase 2, where now we are in the project decision making. Before, if a decision is made, a concrete decision, then we go to the bidding process. That's now inviting bids. Then phase 3 is the construction. Then after 3 is the commissioning and operation of the nuclear power plant. So where have we come from? There are quite a number of milestones which we have been able to achieve. I said earlier, in 2010, the National Economic and Social Council recommended the adoption of nuclear power as a national priority. Then later on, we had the formation of the Nuclear Electricity Project Committee, which are transformed over time. Then in 2012, there was a lot of pre-feasibility studies and other preliminary technical studies. Then in 2020, this when we have a comprehensive legal framework for nuclear safety, security, and safeguards, and that one was through the Nuclear Regulatory Act of 2019, where the Kenya Nuclear Regulatory Authority, it was established in January 10 of 2020. So as I said earlier, there have been quite a number of, because for any big project, you have to be sure. So there has been a comprehensive pre-feasibility studies, There have been plans. There have been studying of the national grid, and we have had the strategic environmental and social impact assessment. And I really hope that the membership of IEK was able to look at this, because this was done, I think, about 5 years ago, but the process apparently has not been concluded. So, as I said, to be able to have nuclear power, the International Atomic Energy Agency, which, so to say, is let me say, so to say, which is the national, or which is the international police, let me say so loosely, that they have come up with the milestones to be able to accomplish before nuclear power can be utilized. So the first one is the national position, and this is what for country X, country A saying we will want to have nuclear power as part of our energy mix. Second is the issues of nuclear safety. So nuclear safety, the first thing is the establishment of a regulatory infrastructure. And here we have the Kenya Nuclear Regulatory Authority with all the components which have been developed, the issues of safety, the issues of security, there's the issue of safeguards. And by the way, these milestones, they go in, they follow from 1, 2. We're not able to go to the next if you have not done the first one. Then there's the issue of the management systems. There's the issue of the funding and financing, because if you don't have resources, then you will not do much. There's the issue of legislative framework, I've said it. There's the issue of safeguards, that this coming up with a framework so that these nuclear technologies is not able to be used for making weapons. There's the issues of the radiation protection. There's the issue of the regulatory framework, electric grid. There's the issue of human resource development, stakeholders involvement, site and supporting facilities, environmental protection, emergency planning, security and physical protection, the nuclear fuel cycle. When this waste comes from the nuclear power plant, where will it be taken to? Then there's the issue of radioactive waste management. In the US and other countries, when it comes to waste, maybe even for us, the common term used is that not in my backyard. You can do anything else, you can have waste, whatever you have it, but not in my backyard. Then there's the issue of industrial involvement, because a nuclear power program is a mega project. So there's need of collaboration and some input from industry. Then the last one in that, if you're able to go through all those, the one which is number 19, now is the process of procurement or bidding for a nuclear power program. So what are environmental safeguards in nuclear? Your bread and butter is there, environmental impact assessment. This is the comprehensive analysis of potential impacts. And this is what I mentioned earlier, that there is a report. The report which is there is not on, is not project specific. It is program. So it is what we call the social environmental impact assessment. Then now when we make the decision, then we go to the project specific environmental impact assessment. Then there's the site selection and consideration, and we have been seeing quite a number of discussions. One of the sites which is under consideration is in Kilifi, and you have been seeing quite a lot of discussions in the news and all over about that. Then there's the issue of biodiversity and ecosystem effects, water use and thermal impacts. Most of these nuclear power plants use water for cooling, so that's why water comes there. Then there's the issue of biodiversity. Normally, there is consensus in the whole world that we need to conserve endangered species and so on. Then there's the radiation protection standards and what we call the ALARA principle, that when you are having any nuclear or radiation project, the aim should be that you have as low dose as reasonably achievable. Then there's the issue of waste management and the disposal. Then there's the issue of cradle to grave approach, that even for these other technologies, like when we use, for example, the traditional sources, attract from import. They come, they are used when they don't have any further use. Either they are exported back, or they are secured in some secure location. Then there is the issue of emergency preparedness and response. And for this one, I said that we should not just think about it when we have nuclear power, because there could be an accident. Like now, so many countries in Africa are considering having nuclear. So if, for example, like Egypt, which is constructing its power plant, if there's an accident of, there's a nuclear power accident in Egypt, what could be the effect? Because you can have some exposure or some radiation levels being blown to Kenya. Then, so in that, we have the plans for potential accidents or incidents. So what are the social safeguards in nuclear? Public participation, I mentioned about it, is critical, important. That's even one of the reasons why we're having this. And the communities where this technology is going to be put are essential. And one thing I should see, there was a time when there was a company which wanted to put some wind turbines somewhere in KNRA. And apparently the contractor was on site, everything was set, but apparently the community there said, no, we don't want it. It would cause our women to be sterile, our cows and so on. And the project didn't kick off. So anything we do, we must always think about the community. Then there's the transparency, regular reporting, and open communication with the public. So as government, and now even of late, it has come up very clearly that as government, we are your employees, you are our employers. So anything we do, we must do it having that one in mind. And I think, as I could see from the call, I could see people who looked as if they're Gen Z, and Gen Z have taught us quite some things. It has been a learning curve for us. Then there's the issue of access to information, that the public have the right to know about nuclear activities. This is not something which you can hide. There's the protection of vulnerable population, special considerations, so like children, women who are expectant. Then there's the issue of workers' rights, unions, occupation, and self-standards in nuclear facilities. Then there's the social impact assessment, where we look at regular meetings, engaging them, local community economic development. That I have seen, there was this project in KNRA which flopped, but I saw one in Kajiado where it was the same project, a similar kind of project where they were putting the wind turbines, but the way the community, they were engaged, they embraced it, and the project took off. So I usually am intrigued that in KNRA it could not pick up, but in Kajiado the project picked up, and it's a success. So even when you're going to have a project somewhere, there's the issue of job creation. Some of the places where you are thinking about could be places which are quite remote. So the people there maybe are not as educated as people in Nairobi and so on. So there's the issue of skill training, because apparently people will trust one of their own. So if, for example, you have in Turkana, there's the issue of the Talo. So if you have somebody from there being employed by the Talo, then they are able to explain to the community, and they are able to trust them better. Then there's the issue of the infrastructure improvement. mostly you'll find that people will buy into a project which is going to improve their infrastructure. So like I was saying, like in Mombasa or coast, there are some places which are they're like religious sites. Like you find there's the Kaya cultural sites. There it's a no-go zone. You cannot even think about it. Then the issues of safety culture and the safety culture and human factors. So many nuclear accidents. As per now, I think largely we have had about 3 nuclear accidents in the world for the last around 50 years. So the first one was the 3 Mile Island in the US. Second one was the Chernobyl, 1986. Third one was the recent one, 2011, the Fukushima. And from those accidents, it was seen that there's no issue with the technology. But where accidents have occurred, it's an issue of the safety culture. It's an issue of human factors. Maybe somebody was not able to switch some light off, was not able to do something which was needed. So there's the issue of leadership commitment, that there's the issue of employee empowerment, that if an employee within any project, not necessarily nuclear, for example, if there's an employee who works in a project where they are having some things to do with the oil, then if they see something not right, then it's encouraged that they are able to report it. But where there's no employee empowerment, then somebody will just sit and just say, it's not my business, and they're not going to do anything about it. So in our industry training programs, in fact, I think like maybe half of our time is spent in training, because there's regular updates on safety procedures and technologies. Then there's the human factors. So these human and organizational factors, the issues of stress. If an employee is stressed, if employees are not well paid, then that could be a disaster in waiting. Then issues of environmental monitoring and protection, continuous measurement of radiation levels in air, water, and soil. And as I said earlier, the measurement of radiation levels in air, water, and soil should not be just done when we have a nuclear power plant. This is something which should be continuously done. Then there's the ecosystem impact assessment, long-term studies on flora and fauna. Then the issue of mitigation measures, I said earlier that a big chunk of the power plants are cooled using water. So those are things which should be considered. The issue of waste management, this is an issue which is quite contentious. Nobody wants waste to be near where they live. So there's the life cycle approach, planning for waste management from facility design stage. So this is just even with our homes, that anything we are doing. In Europe, they have a better mechanism, because from the source, even for household waste, they do the segregation. But if you just mix everything, your plastics, you have food leftovers and everything mixed, then it will be a problem to be able to manage that waste. And in the nuclear industry, there's a lot of learning, a lot of technologies, a lot of things which have been developed in terms of waste classification. There are many ways of handling waste, and we would say there is low-level waste, there is intermediate, and there is high-level waste. So we don't handle the waste in the same way. Then there is storage and disposal. That's engineered barriers. In some countries, they have come up with what we call the deep geological repositories, where they drill underground, maybe around 5 meters down, and they put those waste there. Then there's for any project, decommissioning, site cleanup, environmental restoration, and long-term monitoring. That's very important. Then the regulatory framework and compliance. So the first thing is that you must have an independent regulator, and that's what the Kenya Nuclear Regulatory Authority is, established by law to be independent. Independent in the sense that we should not get a call from maybe office of the CS saying license facility A, that this should be an independent assessment which has been done through a rigorous review of safety cases, environmental impact assessment, and so on. And that's why typically, if, for example, we were to have an operator for nuclear power and they submit to us the documents, it takes about two years for us to be able to review the documents and so on. Then there's the inspection regimes, regular and announced inspection of nuclear facilities. Then there's enforcement, where we have penalties for non-compliance and the power to suspend operations. If you look at so many countries in the world, if there are agencies who the operator of nuclear power plants are afraid of, then they are the regulatory authorities, because they have the power to suspend operations, and this can be quite expensive for the operators. So in conclusion, there need to be energy needs versus environmental protection and the strategies for minimizing ecological footprints, the issues of public trust. We know there is a negative perception through about nuclear, so there's need, and it's just not, it's not just in Kenya, it's worldwide. So they need to be education, transparency, and so on. Then one strength which we have seen coming in the recent past is that we have technological advancements. We have new reactor designs with the enhanced safety features and improved waste management technologies, where the issues of waste, the issues of safety are not really a big issue, because more or less they've been sorted out. So we have the small reactors, maybe one of maybe like 300 megawatts. Yeah, so it's there's a lot of advancement in that area. Then a nuclear power plant is a long-term and a complex program that requires consistent commitments to its implementation. So when the decision is made in Kenya that we're going nuclear, it requires quite a consistent commitment to see and seeing to its implementation. I've seen countries like Egypt. I think they started the nuclear power plant in the 60s. Then there are some challenges. Then somewhere they stopped. But now in the last 10 years, they have again started and they're building. So there are a number of lessons we can learn from other countries. Like the latest nuclear accident in 2011 was the Fukushima in Japan. And this was not a nuclear accident as such, but this was a natural disaster which affected a nuclear power plant. So, but there's so much we can learn on safety, culture, and the issues of emergency preparedness, and so on. Then we can look at successful implementation of nuclear-related projects. And one of it, which I can think, is the one in Finland, where there was a very good community engagement in coming up with a site that's a radioactive waste processing facility and a radioactive waste repository. Then there are countries like UAE, which just, I think like maybe about 20 years ago or 15 years ago, came up with a plan for nuclear power, and they were able to get experts from all over. You know, they have very good money. Then they are building 4 nuclear power plants. As I remind me, they have, I think, is it 2 or 3 which are operational? Yeah, we have, I think, 3 which are already operational. Then we have countries which are not as moneyed as the UAE, countries like Estonia, which now is coming up very strongly with the nuclear power program. They don't have all the money, but the way they have organized it, even without a lot of dollars, they're able to do it. Yeah, so thank you very much. A nuclear power program is not 100 meters race. It's how do you call it? Marathon. Yeah, and Kenyans are very good in marathons. In fact, we are waiting for this week for the marathons to start in the Olympic. I think the other things start first, then we got the marathons. So even for Kenya, and even for us, not just for nuclear, for these big projects, for issues of environmental issues are not a splint. It's a marathon. So we have to have the measures, we have to plan, and so we have to go the long haul. We have to think in terms of 100 years coming, not just think of 5 years plan and so on. So thank you very much. I'm sure my colleague has some things to present, comments. Isaac?
I was thinking, Mr. Mayaka, before we bring in Isaac, first, that was a very, very detailed introduction to this series on the functions, the history, the confluence between nuclear projects and environments, the safeguards, and maybe we've gotten in a few comments as we wait before we get to our next presenter. Maybe you could answer a few so that they can broaden the conversation as your colleague comes in to bring, to highlight and enlighten us some more. So to give you some quick questions, number one, we have Simon Dongo says, why do we need to adopt nuclear power? Yet we have untapped hydropower, geothermal power, and wind power, etc. Considering the risks in operation and the challenges of dealing with nuclear waste, some developed countries have plans to phase out nuclear power, yet we are working hard to implement something fishy. So in essence, it's just a little bit worried, and I believe most of, I've seen 2 or 3 questions that concur to this. Why nuclear power? What are the safety concerns? And basically, what is the cost-benefit analysis of this undertaking? The next one reads, just skeptical, just thinking, do we as a country have the capacity to commission a nuclear power plant in Kenya? If you were to be honest, such a rider, that is from Chai Chivatsi. Then we have Lamek, who asks, what is the current status of nuclear energy in Kenya? How affordable is it? Does Kenya have this capacity to support nuclear power plant operations? So now here we are looking at the costs of having such a facility, the efficiency, and basically in comparison to other power generating or other energy generating infrastructure, where would you rank it? Then I'll combine both Barani, Derek, and Thomas. Barani asks, how is public perception and acceptance of nuclear energy being addressed in Kenya? And finally, do we have a protocol in handling nuclear energy. That is quite a take, but you can give a few rebuttals on it, as I know we'll have another round as we close. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, and thank you for asking those questions. So it's my hope that even as I've presented, I have not in any way tried to market to front nuclear power. As I said earlier, in Kenya, the National Economic and Social Council in 2010 advised or directed, in fact, the correct word is directed, that the country explore issues of nuclear power. So it's an option, and even now a decision has not been made. We don't have a concrete decision on that. But as I said, we are in the preliminary stages, and my colleague and I were regulators, so we don't promote. We just eagerly wait. We advise and do anything we do, but we wait when the country will say, okay, now we want to go nuclear power, we have confirmed. Then we look at the safety. So for example, the country says we want to have nuclear power, and they say we want to have it in Dandora, for example. So we say, okay, give us an assessment. They give us documentation. We look at the documentation and say, okay, it's okay, go ahead, or we cannot go ahead. But there's a dimension where someone has asked that why do we need to have nuclear power? Because we have geothermal. That's more or less of a political question. It's a consideration. So each of them have their advantages, and depending on what you want ahead. So our top policymakers, we need to discuss and guide us, because all of them are sources of power, and each of them has its advantages and disadvantages. And sometimes there are issues of geopolitical issues. Like I can give you an example of Germany, which is given as an example. When we had the Green Party in Germany, where we had the Chancellor Angela Merkel, she entered into a coalition with the Green Party in Germany, and they said they don't want nuclear energy. They don't want nuclear power. But you see, Germany was easily able to import nuclear power from France, because France, the percentage of nuclear is about 70% as compared to the other forms of energy. So Germany, they were able to easily get power from France. Then even the recent crisis of Ukraine, Russia, where so many countries in Europe were depending on very affordable gas, natural gas from Russia. But with the war, you find that quite a number of countries are now considering nuclear. So countries like Finland, Poland, and so many others, Czech Republic, and so many others are now very keen on nuclear, and so on. Then there is the issue of safety concerns. Yes, I agree that there are safety concerns. And the follow-up question is that, do we have the capacity? Yes, as I said earlier, nuclear is an international issue. So there's a lot of assistance. So if the decision is made, there's a lot of assistance from the other international partners. Most likely, even if in terms of investment, because nuclear is a very big investment, and considering our financial situation, then the government of Kenya is not able to invest. So maybe we get an investor from some country who is going to come, invest, build, operate, and later transfer it to Kenya. So those are, because even for other geothermal and so on, so many of them, we have the international investors who have come in. Then the issue of public participation or the perception, I said, is negative for so many people, and not just in Kenya, but we have seen some areas where there is quite some improvement as people are learning, as information is spreading. So we have seen areas where people are accepting, like in South Africa, we have the nuclear power plants, and it's built quite very near a park and so on, and it's not a big issue. But as I said, for us as regulators, we are not promoters. We just bring the picture saying, if you want this, you consider this. There is a president in the US one time who, when he was being advised by economists, the economists were not so much outright. They were saying, Mr. President, if you do this, it will happen this. If you do this, it happens this. So them, they just give proposals, then it's up to the president to decide on how he wants to take it. Thank you. Isaac, you have something to add?
Sorry, before he comes in, probably we could stop sharing the screen so that we could have a clear view of the speaker as they speak. Isaac, you could come in. Thank you. Chair, over to you.
Yeah, we are waiting for Isaac to share his presentation. Top of that, I think questions have been dealt with properly by Mayaka. Those who need further clarifications, you can keep on noting them down. Gideon and Edwin and Popo will take proper questions, or rather verbal questions, after the presentations by Isaac. So just have that in mind. Thank you. Mr. Isaac, karibu.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, can I make a comment?
Would you mind waiting so that we can take a final session of questions, please?
So is it?
We can see the presentation.
Is it moving on your side?
Have it in slide.
Is it moving?
Yes, it is moving.
It's moving.
Probably put it on slide mode. Yes, we can see it's moving.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity. I'll share with you an overview on environmental radiation protection, but maybe we can have a short discussion. Maybe why do we need to embrace nuclear energy technology? And one of the reasons is because it improves our energy independence. And you can realize in some of the Western world countries, 70% or 75% of their energy relies on the nuclear energy technology. For example, countries like France, Netherlands, Belgium, and even some of the countries which are seizing their nuclear energy power plants, they are also importing electricity or energy which has been produced using nuclear energy technology from the neighboring countries. And the other thing, it's also assisting access to affordable energy services. And you might realize Kenya is one of the countries in Africa with the most costly electricity tariffs, the reliability of the electricity supply. And the most interesting fact, which is also the interesting moment for your organization, is nuclear energy technology, embracing that technology is also lead to environmental protection, including the efforts which the world is making, countries are making to ensure climate change is going down. For example, nuclear technology has the lowest carbon footprint. The world is also moving towards phasing out highly dependency of fossil fuel. The nuclear energy can really assist. And one fact is nuclear energy technology is as safe as solar. It is one of the safest technology which can be used as source of nuclear energy. And all over the world, countries embracing. For example, you can see that pictorial presentation of nuclear energy power development globally. For example, right now, there's construction of nuclear power plants in Egypt.
Sorry, sir.
Yes.
I think we're still on the first screen. You have not moved the screen.
It's not moving. Okay.
Probably you could put it on presentation mode, and then you could move your to the other slides.
Oh, okay. Now I understand. Maybe that's why.
Perfect. It's much better.
Is it moving?
No, we're still on the first,
Still on the first.
with the introduction, still on the first screen.
Maybe let me send you the slide. Maybe you can share from your side.
Yes, just on our side, we will be able to share that. Let me quickly type the email to send to.
Okay.
Then we could share it on our side.
Yeah,
No, I think, sorry for chiming in, Mundi. I think you are sharing your window.
Oh.
Yeah, just start afresh and share your whole screen. Then you pick the presentation.
Okay.
So go to the share button.
Yes.
And then up there on that, you have the blue, go up to share entire screen. You have Windows.
Oh, okay. No. Yeah.
Then you click the screen, then you have the share being activated to blue. Is it blue? The share button? Yes, that way. Then now pick your slide. Just click on your slide there.
Now it's okay.
try moving it. Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah. So I was
No,
discussing.
perfect.
Yes.
It's now perfect. Thank you, Dr. Pinde, for that.
So I continue.
Yes, please.
So I was mentioning one other factor or one other reason why people are embracing nuclear energy technologies, because it promotes to environmental protection. For example, the nuclear energy technology has one of the lowest carbon footprint. It is also assisting a number of countries now to achieve their goal of, through gradual phase out of reliance on the fossil fuel. And the other thing is that the nuclear energy technology, it is as safe as solar. It is one of the safest technology when it relates to impact on the environment and the climate change. So there are many reasons why a number of countries are embracing. And that's why when you see in the next slide, there are many countries which are embraced nuclear technology as part of their nuclear energy infrastructure, as part of the energy infrastructure. There are others which are already constructing. For example, Egypt is one of African countries, is constructing nuclear power plant in his country. Bangladesh, it completed its first nuclear power plant a few months ago. Same case with Turkey, and there are more upcoming, even in the Western world. And Kenya is one of the countries which have considered introducing nuclear power into its energy mix, including countries like Nigeria, Ghana, Algeria, Morocco, etc., and Indonesia. And development of a nuclear infrastructure has been mentioned by my colleague, Mr. Mayaka. It's usually in a phased approach. It takes a minimum of 15 years, 10 to 15 years, depending with the level of your economy, the infrastructure which are already in place in your country. It can take minimum of 10 to 15 years, divided into 3 phases, and each phase has a milestone. And one of the milestones, for example, in phase 1 is the country making a knowledgeable commitment to adopt nuclear power program. And some of the activities which I usually undertake in phase 1 is, for example, coming up with what we normally call the Nuclear Energy Program Implementation Organization, that is a NEPIO. Like, for example, in Kenya, we have a NEPIO, that is the Nuclear Power and Energy Agency, is the NEPIO in Kenya, coming up with regulatory body or enhancing the existing regulatory body to be able to regulate the nuclear power program, a regulatory body which will be involved in regulating nuclear safety, nuclear security, nuclear safeguards, which in the case of Kenya is the Kenya Nuclear Regulatory Authority, whose mandate was expanded in year 2019, December, after the Kenya passed a new law which repealed the old law, and also coming up with initiatives of capacity building of other competent authorities. For example, there are competent authorities involved in environmental protection, like in Kenya, the NEMA, who oversees the issue of EIA, other authorities that are involved in occupational health safety, for example, the DOSH. So those are some of the activities which are usually initiated in phase 1 to ensure when the country is able to come up with the first nuclear power program, or the legal framework, the regulatory framework, and the authorities that are responsible have the capacity of having full oversight and full regulatory framework over the nuclear power program. Then in phase 2, now the country is ready to invite bids, to negotiate with contractor, and construction of the first nuclear power plant starts in phase 2. Then in phase 3, that we are now at the end. Now the country now is ready to operate the first nuclear power plant. That is maybe 15 years from the kickoff of the first approach, or 20 years, depending with the level. And for all the three phases, there are 19 infrastructures which Mr. Mayaka has discussed, which have to be met by the country. And some of the infrastructures which relate directly to environment, for example, the infrastructure number 2, nuclear safety. This infrastructure number, for example, 5, the legal framework. This number 7, radiation protection. This, for example, number 10, on human resource development, because you need to have competent workforce which is able to carry out the operation and also to work in the regulatory setup, be it in the environmental sector, be it in the regulatory body which is involved in nuclear safety, nuclear safeguards, and nuclear security. This is the element on stakeholder engagement which takes place across all the three phases. There is the issue of environmental preparedness and response, that is number 14. It is cut across from all the phases. And also the issue of radioactive waste management, which development of it starts from phase 1, going on up to the decommissioning phase. And there are some concerns that are normally raised by people as it relates to environment. The first concern is usually the issue of direct exposure to the sources of radiation that are in the nuclear power plant. One fact is, before we arrive at phase 3, at the end of phase 3, and achieve the milestone number 3 of being ready to operate the first nuclear power plant, they are usually measures which have been put in place through regulatory framework to ensure the first nuclear power plant is well shielded, and that prevents direct exposure to the sources that are used in the nuclear power plant. And this is enabled through steel structures that have been used that form part of the shielding, the concrete structures of the nuclear power plant, and other materials that are normally used to ensure the radioactive materials, the nuclear materials, are contained within the power plant and they are well shielded. Then there are also the control measures or the control access, for example, use of physical measures to prevent people to access or to get into direct exposure by the sources. There are also the administrative controls. So when the country comes up now with the legal framework, the regulatory framework, which also comes up with the authorization processes that involves even licensing of operation of the nuclear power plant, then all these measures have to be considered before even the first nuclear power plant is licensed to operate. Then that means all the measures that include the shielding, the control access, preventing direct exposure to the sources of radiation have already been put in place. The other concern is usually the release of radionuclides into the environment. One fact is very small amount of radioactive gases and liquids and materials are usually released into the environment. And any release to the environment is subjected to process of authorization by the regulatory authority. When the legal framework or the regulatory framework is being put in place, the regulatory authority and the government has to come up with what you normally call the clearance levels, which an NPP or a nuclear power plant can be allowed to release those small amount of radioactive materials into the environment at a level at which the activity of those materials is below the clearance levels, to ensure that they will pose no danger to the public when they are released or to the environment. So those are the measures which have to be put in place. So the concerns are usually addressed through the legal framework and implementation of the legal framework to ensure even those small amounts that will be released into the environment, they pose almost zero danger to the environment and to the members of the public. The other concern to the environment is impact in case an accident happens. We are all in agreement that accident can happen anywhere and at any time, and in any sector, in any industry, or in any undertaking, or in any project. And when you're coming up with any project, not only in NPP, even in road construction, even in the geothermal power, even in the hydroelectric power project, when you're carrying out the feasibility study and before you even initiate that project, you have to weigh the risk and the benefit. An accident can happen. The same case with accident can happen in a nuclear power plant. And in order now to take control of accidents, then when they're coming up with designs, they usually apply a series of engineered safety features to ensure the design of that nuclear power plant minimizes the probability of occurrence of accidents or of an accident. And if an accident occurs, then the design is well designed in such a way the quantities of radionuclide that will be released into the environment is as minimal as possible. And this is usually achieved through use of set of extensive analysis that takes into consideration what are some of the possible accidents that can happen in that area. Is that area prone to earthquakes? What is the meteorological studies of that area? What are usually the probabilities of accidents of certain nature to happen in that area? What is the probability of occurrence? Then what are some of the measures or engineering measures or administrative measures which has to be put in place in case such an accident happens, to ensure there's no release of the nuclear radioactive materials into the environment? So those are some of the consideration which are normally taken into place. And before even an NPP is allowed to operate, there need to be an emergency preparedness and response plan, which takes into consideration all that studies and the set of extensive analysis that has been carried out in their study before an NPP is allowed even to operate. So there are concerns of impact into the environment, but before even authorization is issued, during the pre-feasibility studies, during the entire phases of the coming up with an NPP or a nuclear power plant, all these concerns are usually taken into consideration. And that's why very few accidents have ever happened during operation of a nuclear power program. For example, the Fukushima one, that was an accident due to a natural incident. Another one in Chernobyl, that was due to some human factors which led to that accident. But every time the global community are able to learn from those accidents and to put measures that are necessary to prevent occurrence of similar accidents. It's the same as the aeroplane accidents. Yes, one accident can have a big impact, but we all understand it's more even safer to travel with an aeroplane than even traveling on foot or even on the road. And that does not prevent countries or entities from embracing transport with air because of the safety measures that are put in place in the air transport industry. So the same case or the same scenario also applies in the nuclear power program. And thank you. We can now open room for questions and comments too.
Thank you very much, Mr. Isaac. I think you've given very good insight on matters how safe, why we need this nuclear energy, and allaying so much on the fears that I see we have questions here. So I'll take questions from those who had raised their hands first, and then later we'll be proceeding to the ones that have been typed in. So we go with you, Mr. Popo, first.
Thank you, moderator, and good question from authority. First, I want to say that Kenya as a country is very ripe for nuclear energy. We have very high cost of electricity, and nuclear energy will be a very important source of energy to really get us very cheap, environmentally friendly, very, very friendly environmentally, I must say. However, I want first to give two examples of two nuclear accidents. The one that happened in Chernobyl in 1986, actually it led to the collapse of Soviet Union and brought a stop to the Cold War because of the institutional framework. Kenya have done that. We have sorted out the institutional framework for nuclear energy, but the political framework is not right for nuclear energy in Kenya today. And the mistrust between the public and the government cannot assure the citizens that in case of anything, there'll be safety. Where we employ archaeologists to head our fire department, you can expect anything in a nuclear power plant or nuclear management. So up to that level, there's that lack of public confidence that if it's allowed in this country, it can happen and produce energy. Even if there's an accident, it can be an accident, but it is at this time now, the public don't have confidence that the government and the institutions that have been established to run that is the board and the authority, that they can really regulate the sector well. One. Secondly, we have a key source of alternative clean energy, that's TDC. What is the exploration rate? Because we have got wells in TDC that can still produce our power needs, even able to export. Why can't we explore first the capability of our geothermal to its maximum potential, then go to the power plant, to nuclear? That's what we do. Otherwise, in terms of being environmental friendly, from my research, my reading, nuclear energy is one of the best sources of power in the world. In fact, there are now very new materials in materials like thorium, apart from uranium and plutonium, that can react for very many years, and they're really safe. But the political framework in Kenya and the mistrust between the public and the politicians, I think it's a tall order from my assessment.
Thank you, Napopo. You've given comments, questions. Hopefully, Mr. Mudia, you've been able to pick one or two depending on the flow of that. Next, we have Edwin.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Mundia, as well as Mr. Mayaka. And just two questions. I remember Mr. Mayaka, in his presentation, he did mention that somebody will ask you, what are you guys, what is your job now that we don't have a nuclear power plant in Kenya yet? Alex, you may want to mute. I don't know. Okay, thank you. Okay, you're back again. Okay. So so my question is, number one, I think in his response he just mentioned that we have the issue of transboundary radioactive material. So I've seen you shared a map. So my question was, what is the nearest or functional or operational nuclear power plant from Kenya, maybe in the neighboring countries? Which one is operational? Maybe I'm using my phone. I didn't see your map clearly to see the countries that already have it operational. Then in your presentation now, Mr. Mundia, you said there are those three phases for implementation of a nuclear power plant facility. I just wanted to know what in those three phases, which phase is Kenya at this moment, and probably what are the possible timelines for us to be able to possibly see a power plant? Because I know all the fears and the risks and the concerns notwithstanding, I mean, if others have done it, then maybe Kenya is just able. There's only one way to know whether you have capacity or not to handle one, and it is by putting up one. So just at what phase are we as a country? Thank you.
So maybe we can take those and then we'll take the others from the commentary.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Popo and Mr. Edwin, for your questions. And Mr. Mayaka is also with me. He'll also be able to provide support also. Well, one of the valid comments which Mr. Popo has mentioned is the issue of political framework for the nuclear power program. Basically, we really need a good political, we need a very strong political goodwill, which to some extent the government has really expressed it, because it has been able to come up, the government was able to initiate and complete the activity of repealing the old law, which was the Radiation Protection Act, and coming up with the Nuclear Regulatory Act, CAP 243, which shows the political goodwill, the political framework is shaping in readiness for the NPP. And the government is still also supporting the development of regulations that are related to regulation, to oversight and regulation of the nuclear power program in Kenya. The other thing also is the government has also set up a NEPIO, that is the Nuclear Energy Program Implementing Organization, with full funding from the government, from the Treasury, which is now spearheading this Kenya's program of the NPP. And the political framework is being enhanced, is strengthening, and we are sure in 1 or 2 years, it will be fully compact in readiness to support the NPP program. It is true we have a number of modalities of clean energy in Kenya. For example, the geothermal is one of the source of clean energies which we are having. In some areas in Kenya, we already have the wind energy, and also we've seen a number of industries, a number of entities also embracing the solar energies. So, but for us to have a reliable supply of energy, And for us to have a sustainable energy supply, then we need to have an energy mix of different sources of energies, in addition to the geothermal and to the wind and to the other renewable energy sources such as the solar. And that's where you also need to bring in the nuclear power program also into the energy mix of Kenyan energy. Imagine maybe one or two of those energy sources collapses and you don't have any other redundancy, then the nuclear energy or the nuclear power program will set in. And that will assist us to have a sustainable power supply, which is also cheap in the long run. Mr. Edwin, you've asked about the phase in which Kenya is. Kenya, we are in phase 1, but we've also started some activities which are related in phase 2. We're in phase 1 because now Kenya, we are waiting the final approval of feasibility study by the government now to kick off completely that activities. But the other activities which we are on in right now, which are in phase 2. For example, feasibility study is over. Already we are on advanced stages of site evaluation. So we're in phase 1 as Kenya, but we've already initiated activities as Kenya which fall in phase 2. And we're expecting by 2035, 2037, Kenya to have its first nuclear power plant according to the work plan that has been laid down by the Kenya SNEPIO, that is the Nuclear Power and Energy Agency. Maybe Mr. Mata, do you have comments?
Yeah, so thank you very much for those questions. Yeah, so like if I could give an example, they said that in Kenya we have a geothermal capacity of about 5,000 megawatts. And superimpose that with, of late, there is a lot of talk about building data centers. So if one data center requires maybe about, depending on the size, one data center requires about 4,000 megawatts. So if we are able to attract investments in Kenya, maybe for one data center, one large data center, then that one more or less as exploited all the geothermal, because as per the studies, we have about 5,000 megawatts. And just recently, I was discussing with some investors who are coming to Kenya, and they were saying they don't like investing in things which are underground, because there's a lot of risk. You never know how much is there. You can just project. And that one has happened even with the Talo, that there was at some point where we were saying we have a lot of oil, but you can see now where the discussions are. Then in terms of political preparedness, that's of course a question which is really above our pay grade, but we are Kenyans. And you never know what the future holds. Yeah, so I think maybe I can leave it at that, on that. You know, political systems come, they change, and they improve. Even where we are, we could not imagine less than 2 years ago that we could be where we are. So political relationships are quite fluid, and they can change to the better or to the worse. But of course, our prayer is that we have our political systems improving. But having said that, I want to say something. You know, I said nuclear. You know, when you go nuclear, then that's now not upon you as a country. I remember in 2000, 07, 08, when we had some issues. I remember the ambassador of US coming up and saying they cannot allow Kenya to deteriorate because Kenya is a very strategic country, you know, where we're located and all that. So when you go nuclear, then it's not now upon you. You have a lot of support. And I could give an example of currently Ukraine, where there is a war between Russia and Ukraine, and there is a nuclear power they have. So essentially the UN has spent a lot of money, a lot of resources, because the UN has taken ownership, has taken ownership, or they are now more or less in charge of that nuclear power plant. So a nuclear power plant is a big investment, a transboundary investment. It's not really about a country. And I say this because if you have, of course, you have been seeing the news, there's the issue of Iran talking about enriching uranium, about nuclear, and there's a lot of, and even many other countries, there's a lot of international interest in that. So when you go nuclear, then it ceases to be a Kenyan issue. Then Edwin was asking a question on my earlier on that, of course, we regulate some other sectors. So there's nuclear and these other sectors of radiation which we regulate. And again, nuclear is a long-term commitment. Even if we start building a nuclear power plant now, if we start building now, it will take us maybe around 15 years for it to be operational. The only guys who moved quite fast is United Arab Emirates because they poured a lot of money. So it will take time before we have a nuclear power plant. So now we are more or less in the preparatory stages, setting the stage. And another thing mentioning about that, if we can have maybe one industry like we have some iron ore, I know, in Meru and in Taita. So if we have an investment, if we have to, in fact, our iron ore, we export it raw. But if we have to have a company which will invest in processing this iron ore, let's say somewhere in Taita, they will need about 5,000 megawatts to be able to process. This is iron ore is or steel is an energy intensive application. So those are some of the considerations which we're looking at and which makes us to have these plans in place, even as we look in the future. You know, the US and even other countries, they plan quite ahead. They don't plan like 5 years and so on. So like if we have 5,000 capacity of 5,000 megawatts of geothermal, when we exploit it, then what next? Some of us were around in around 1999 when we had the power rationing, because then we were essentially depending on hydro. Then there was a drought. Then we had a lot of power rationing. In fact, it was a very bad situation. Some other countries like Ghana is a big problem. They have a lot of power rationing. In South Africa, even if they have a nuclear power plant, still they are energy deficient. There is a lot of power rationing. So those are some of the considerations, and we're looking in the future that what happens, and so it's more or less preparing for the future. And really, our aim is to demystify nuclear, saying if you use nuclear under these parameters, then you are good to go. But if you don't observe these parameters, then you are not good to go. I like giving an example of the pharmacy and the poisons board, and I like their name very much, pharmacy and poisons. So on one side, it is a pharmacy. On the other side, if you cross the other side, it's a poison and it can be a really a very bad poison. So the same way with nuclear. Under the very good conditions, then it is a very good thing. If the safety considerations and security and safeguards are not put in consideration, then it can be a big problem. So that's my take.
Thank you very much, Mayaka. I think we're further engaging and getting deeper insights into this. Now we take the written submissions. One from Lucy Chepketer. She asks, what guarantees do we have as a country when it comes to proper nuclear waste management, considering we are struggling as a country to manage ordinary wastes? Yeah, that's a different lens. Then we have Sheila Afula. She quips that borrowing from previous disasters such as the Chernobyl disaster and Fukushima, what measures do we intend to put in place to mitigate against the long-term environmental contamination due to radiation leaks affecting soil, water, and air? Then we have Victor, who asks, what is NUPEA doing to bring the people on board, since environmentalists and the Mwananchi have been clear that Kenya is not ready for the project? And I'd want to further ask Victor, which project are we talking about? And again, it's quite bold to say environmentalists and Mwananchi. That is quite bold. I think not all share those sentiments, but you can get the drift of that question. Then we have Ferretti Thomas. He asks, does radiological impacts of accidents consider geographical scopes? Or rather, radiological impacts of accident consider geological scopes? Then we have Jecton. He asks, radioactive waste has contaminated an estimated 200 square miles of groundwater in Hanford, making it the most radioactive place in the United States. What is your take in relation to this challenge? And yeah, so it closes it at that. And I'd also now add mine and ask, as a nuclear regulatory agency, maybe you could further expound on the types of licenses you offer, for what scale of works, the processes that are due. And another closing question from me would be, as a country, can you say we are resource ready for nuclear, or rather to have nuclear plants? And when I ask about being resource ready, I'm looking at the raw material side of it, not really the finance and facilitation, or rather the financing side of things. So, Mr. Mayaka and Mr. Isaac, we can close in on those in any particular, rather with no particular order. Everyone bites what they can deliver based on. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would discuss the issue of waste and fuel. So normally the way nuclear power plants operate is that you will buy fuel from the countries which produce fuel. So in the world, we have around 400 operating nuclear power plants, and most of them are buying fuel. In fact, I think maybe if the countries which are producing fuel for nuclear power plants, they could just be about 5. And there are just maybe about 5 countries which can build the nuclear power plants. So normally you not go to the process of producing fuel, but you'll be buying fuel. The big advantage with the fuel and the waste from nuclear power plants that it's very compact. Sorry, so a fuel which could go for about 2 years, depending on the type of reactor, is the equivalent of maybe one or a 40-foot container. That is the fuel which, depending on the type of type of reactor. So normally you import fuel, load it, use it for about 2 years, because you refuel after about 2 years. Then after 2 years now you have the waste. That's the spent fuel. So of course there are concerns about being able to deal with that spent fuel. And some countries which have realized that they have some challenge, they have come up with very good methods of doing that. Like Egypt, which is building a nuclear power plant, which is being built by a company from Russia. They have agreed, they have a government-to-government agreement that the waste or the spent fuel would be sent back to Russia for the processing and all that. So they'll just be having fuel, come in, fuel, use it for 2 years, then it's sent back. So one big advantage with the fuel from all the waste from nuclear power plant is that it is it's quite compact. If I remember well, this is about 20 or 40 feet container, but the equivalent for coal is a whole stadium. So just consider the waste, which is a whole stadium, with the one of maybe 1 or 2 20-feet containers. Then measures, I think that one Isaac will did it, the measures for environmental, the project, geological. So I think I've just essentially dealt with the issue of waste, and my colleague will deal with the other issues. Thank you.
Okay, welcome, Mundia.
Okay, thank you, Edward. Maybe I remember there's one colleague of us who mentioned about the Hansford issue, where the river there was highly contaminated. One fact is the Hansford site was opened in 1943. And what happened that time, it was being used when America or the USA was in its early stages of researching, of coming up with plutonium bombs and atomic bombs, and very minimal or very limited knowledge on radiation protection, radiation protection, nuclear safety had been embraced as per that time. There was some also dumping of some of the waste next to the riverbank, and that's where that time there was a lot of contamination of the waters in that area. But now things are totally different, and we don't expect a person or a country coming up with a nuclear power program to do what was done at that time, when the focus that time was on coming up with the plutonium research or the uranium research for coming up with atomic bombs and bombs, which were later used in the Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But in this case, when you're coming up with a nuclear power program, you've seen, we've mentioned it's a three-phased approach. And in the three-phased approach, we have the 19 infrastructure issues which need to be addressed by the government and the NEPIO and the operator before eventually an authorization is issued, even before the vendors themselves, who are the international vendors, even accept now coming up and negotiating with you or bidding. They have to ensure some of the infrastructural issues, that is the legal framework, the regulatory framework, the framework related to the issue of radioactive waste management, framework related to the environmental protection, framework related to the radiation protection are already in place before, and there are progress which are being made by the country and the entities, that is the NEPIO and the regulatory body and the government of that country. So by the time an NPP is being set up, or is being ready now for operation, then all measures that are necessary to protect the environment, protect the members of the public, to deal with the radioactive waste that will be generated will already be in place. And this will not only involve the regulatory authority that is involved with nuclear safety, security, and safeguard. It will also involve the issue of enhancing the competence and the capacity of the competent authority or the regulatory authority that is involved with environmental protection, like in our country, that is NEMA. So all those measures are usually put in place to ensure protection of our environment and members of the public, and the issue of handling any radioactive waste that might be generated during the operation of the nuclear power program. And mind you, one element that has to be put in place in the EIA is how will you handle the waste generated? And in this case, it will include also the radioactive waste. How will you manage that waste? So those are some of the elements which has to be taken into consideration, and how will you implement the measures? And periodically, I'm sure the regulatory authority and the competent authority which is responsible for environmental protection also have to carry out audit, to carry out inspection on the implementation of the agreed EIA and the radiological impact assessment report that was issued by the licensee, who is now the nuclear power plant operator. So remind me the other question. I think I did not take note of all of them. Mr. Alex, the other question was?
The other one was on, to put it, we had, if we are resource ready, one. The other one was, let me quickly go back. The handful has been answered. The biological impacts has been answered. There was a question on NUPEA and the work that it's doing to promote acceptability of nuclear energy. Yeah. Oh, the other one was on actually the licenses that are offered by your agency, and their nature, basically the nature of the licenses that you give. And maybe to add one more that has popped up, it's sorry, let me quickly go to it. Basically the economic or rather the importance of nuclear energy to Kenya's economy in a kind of a ballpark statement. And after that, I believe we'll have closed with the question sessions.
Oh, thank you. Now, on the issue of are we ready resource-wise, remember we mentioned development of a nuclear power infrastructure is a phased process, which takes a minimum of 10 to 15 years. It can even take 20 years or 30 good years, depending with the status of the country, where it is. And right now, I mentioned our country is in phase 1. And the most important milestone which a country in phase 1 need to have achieved is, one is to be ready to make a knowledgeable commitment to a nuclear power program. And what is also involved there is establishment of what you normally call the NEPIO, which in our case is NUPEA, establishment of a regulatory authority. By the end of phase 1, there's a likelihood there'll be already a law or an act to regulate nuclear facility or nuclear activities in the country. In phase 1, the government, the NEPIO and the government will also have started developing human resource competencies. And to this extent, Kenya has done all that. For example, for the last 10 years, the government has been sponsoring a number of students to undertake courses and postgraduate programs related to the nuclear power program, radiation protection, nuclear safety, nuclear security, also in conjunction with development partners such as the IEA, Korean government, the US government, and other development partners. A number of Kenyans have been airlifted to the countries, those countries where they are undergoing studies. So according to phase one, already the government has put measures for the resources which need to be there by phase two. And it's a continuous process. The issue of developing human resources, financial resources, and etc. On the issue of economic importance of a nuclear power program, I think it is of very high economic importance. One thing we need to take note is that when you're coming up with a nuclear power program, all sectors of economy will be involved, not only scientists or nuclear engineers. For example, coming up with the nuclear vessel, you'll require mechanical engineers, you'll require technicians who have done fabrication, the welders, people who are highly specialized in quality control, quality assurance of weldings. You need geologists, people of different expertise will be required. So if we go full force on construction, that means the country will have also to empower the vocational institutions, the technical colleges, the area where the nuclear power plant will be constructed. The economic activities will sprout enormously in that area. So because it is a capital-intensive project, the ripple effect of the economy will be felt by all people. And remember, a nuclear power plant will run for 30 to 50 years. So you can understand the economic benefits that we'll be able to get when it kicks off in its full force. Nuclear has done a lot. For example, it has really tried and has really done a lot of work in engaging stakeholders. We've heard of the activities it has been undertaking in areas like in Kilifi areas. It has been engaging the communities there. It has been engaging even the international community to come and sensitize the local stakeholders on the same. It has also been supporting the human resource development that is necessary for the nuclear power program. So NUPEA has really carried out a lot of activities. It had also a very big role. It played also a very big role a key role when the government was also developing or establishing the Nuclear Regulatory Act, CAP 243. Currently, the regulatory body exists, and we are issuing licenses, various licenses. Even if we are yet to start operating the first nuclear power plant in Kenya, probably in 20 years' time, we'll have one, or 21 years' time from 10 years or 12 years from now, we'll have one. There are various licenses that are normally issued by the Kenya Nuclear Regulatory Authority. For example, Kenya right now is operating 3 cyclotrons, which are comparable to research reactors, but now here they use electricity and accelerators to produce radionuclides, like FDG or the fluorine 18 for which are used in diagnosis of cancers through nuclear medicine techniques. That's a good example of how Kenya is ready to regulate complex nuclear facilities. One is in KTRH, another one is in Aga Khan, and there's a third one which is on its final stages of commissioning at the Nairobi West. We also have other facilities such as the radiotherapy facilities, which are high-risk facilities that are used in treatment of cancers in Kenya, in various areas of Kenya, in the Rift Valley region, in the coastal region, in the northeastern region, and another in Nairobi and central region, one in central region. And we normally issue operational or operating licenses to such facilities. On the road construction industry, we have the nuclear density gauges, which are usually licensed by the authority. When you go to the industries, like in the food production industries, in the breweries industries, in the soft drinks production industries, they normally use radioactive material for process control, for quality assurance controls, even in the cement industry, in the mining industry, like in the base titanium. So there are licenses which normally issue for operation licenses. There are licenses for construction of such facilities. These licenses for the design of such facilities. There are also licenses to be allowed to administer ionizing radiation to persons, like the radiologists are licensed by us also to administer ionizing radiation to persons, like in hospitals, the radiographers, the medical physicists who are involved in treatment planning using the radiotherapy facilities or the nuclear medicine facility. So there are a number of licenses. Also licenses, for example, for radioactive waste management of facilities like nuclear medicine facilities, licenses for disposal of radioactive materials that have reached or which are below the clearance levels that has been set by the regulatory authorities, which are based on the international standards. There are also licenses normally issued to transport radioactive sources from point A to point B. For example, when you're importing a radiotherapy source from Europe, then you'll need to get import license from the authority. If you want to export it out of the country, there are also those licenses which you have to get from the authority. Transporting that imported source from JKIA from Kilindini Port to your site, you also need authorization to transport, authorization which indicates that you have put measures in place to ensure the source will be safe during transport and secured from any person who might be intending to cause any incident, such as a nuclear security incident, and a number of licenses that we normally issue, even licenses to offer services such as consultancy services, such as radiation survey of radiation facility. We do certify such service providers. Yes, Alex, any other question? Maybe I've not tackled. Maybe Mayaka, you can.
No other questions from the chat box. No other questions from the Q&A. I also find no other questions.
So maybe
I think you really opened up on the opportunities that are there. So members who have joined, this is the team, and that is a resource we can.
So I think, Chair, in conclusion,
Mayaka, I see you want to go.
Yes. So I think I would just like to conclude, especially given the type of questions which have come in. One of the questions which comes in is, do we have the capacity? Do we have the resources?
Yeah, kindly mute yourself. Okay, you can go ahead, Mr. Mayaka.
Yeah, so one of the questions which keeps on coming is, do we have the capacity? Do we have the resources? And I want to give one incident among many which I've encountered. One time we were traveling to the US through Seattle, and we were a group of Kenyans, maybe around 5. Then as we were, Kenyans, the way we are, as we were discussing in Swahili, then we meet somebody. Says, you guys, you're Kenyans? We say, yes. Then the person identifies himself that he is a Kenyan and working for the Boeing, the airplane company. And that's just one among many. We have Kenyans working, for example, in the South African nuclear company. We have a number of Kenyans working in the US in nuclear companies and so on. So especially in terms of human resources, and we have quite a number of Kenyans here who have been trained and who are ready to go. So in terms especially of human resource, we are good to go. And sometimes I like expanding the ozone out of Kenya to include Africa. According to the African Development Bank, there are 640 million Africans who have no access to electricity. And that is quite outrageous. Then again, according to statistics, more than 42% of the global workforce will come from Africa from 2030. And that's why you see many global companies investing and partnering with Africa, because it makes a lot of sense. In the nuclear landscape, among so many others, companies owned by people like Bill Gates. Last year during the COP28, Bill Gates was there. So many companies, like the company owned by Bill Gates, he has really invested in nuclear technology. And the projection is that by 2035, his company will have sold about 100 nuclear power plants. So Africa, we are really at a very good position, because we are now the next frontier. Just like so many years ago, we had the missionaries coming to Africa, and now we have quite a number of them going out of Africa to spread the gospel to those countries. So it's an opportunity for us. And in one of the ways is by nuclear and some other technologies. You are seeing even the recent one where the president was discussing with some country in the US about building data centers. Data centers are energy intensive. So if you can have maybe around 1 or 2 data centers, you can have 1 steel processing plant, then we require a lot of energy, which far much exceeds. So I think really from our end is we have a lot of optimism and enthusiasm that things would be better for us. So thank you very much for having us. Thank you.
Yeah, we appreciate very much for your time, Mr. Mayaka, Mr. Isaac, and for you opening up and delving into this matter of nuclear energy and enlightening us a little into what you do, the environmental benefits, the safeguards that are there when dealing with this type of energy, and basically the general process of engaging and dealing with nuclear energy. So I'd further want to say that we are doing a continuous talk series on energy, and basically this is to promote the conference, which will be on energy transition. And with that, maybe from my team, somebody should share the conference call. We need exhibitors, we need presenters, we need you to attend as delegates, and let us basically see what best we can do for this series. I'm being reminded further that as this call was recorded, for those who want, rather, those who've attended, you'll get the same transcription sent to you, to your emails. So worry not in term, or rather, whether you'd want to follow it later. And further to that, it will also be posted on the EAK's YouTube channel. So unless we have, we now close this session, and we meet next time, same place really, no, maybe to be a different link, but we dig further into what energy options we have within, or rather what sustainable energies we have to explore. Thank you all, and thank you for your time. We are a little bit 10 minutes past our time, which I think was a fair enough moment. For those who want to further engage with us, register as members, or update their subscriptions, kindly you can be left back and ask questions, and you will be answered. Thank you all, and have a good evening. Thank you so much.